In this video, I am going to go over the basics about crime scene investigation and evidence collection. The first thing we need to talk about is Dr. Edmond Locard. He's a very important person in forensics. He created the world's first forensics lab. He did that in 1910 in Lyon, France. What you need to know is that Locard created the world's first forensic lab in France. And he also came up with this idea that we call the Locard exchange principle. And what that is he came up with the idea that anytime anyone comes in contact with anyone or anything, a cross-transfer of physical material can occur. That means that anytime you touch something, you might leave something behind and you might pick something up, such as hugging someone and getting hair on you, or if you happen to bump your car door against something else and some paint gets transferred. That's what he's talking about. Now, it doesn't happen every single time. When you pick up a glass to drink out of it, it doesn't leave glass on you unless it's broken, but you leave fingerprints behind. But the Locard exchange principle is talking about anytime anything gets in contact with something else, it can be transferred. Another idea with the transfer is the idea of different types of transfer. Primary transfer is when you go and you hug a dog and you get dog hair on you. It goes directly from the dog to you. Then you go and you hug somebody else, and then that dog hair goes from you to somebody else. We call that secondary transfer. What might you call it if your friend then hugged somebody else and the original dog hair transferred on? We'll talk about that in class. There are different types of evidence. The first type is called direct evidence. The best example of this is an eyewitness, somebody who has directly seen the crime occur. The next type is called indirect evidence, but we don't really use that word. We use the word circumstantial. You've probably heard that on TV shows and movies. There are two types of circumstantial evidence. There's physical evidence and biological evidence. Physical evidence is really broad, so let's talk about biological. Biological is something that comes from the body. Blood, hair. If somebody cut off a finger, the finger would be biological evidence. Fingerprints are a little weird. Fingerprints, they do leave behind oils from your body, but they are considered physical evidence. And we will talk about that in more detail later. So fingerprints are the only things that kind of come from you that are not biological. Everything else is biological. Physical, it's anything. It could be a pencil, it could be a piece of paper, it could be a fiber left behind, it could be a piece of glass, a bullet, a knife, anything like that. Anything that doesn't come from the human body would be considered physical evidence. Now, that evidence can be broken down into two more categories, individual and class. Individual evidence is when you can tie that piece of evidence to one specific source, one single person, one single object, such as fingerprints. We all have our own unique fingerprints. Class evidence, on the other hand, is something that can be tied to a group of people or a group of items, such as you find a footprint and it's size 8 and it's a Nike shoe. You can tie it to people with size 8 Nike shoes. It's a group of people, not a specific person. Here's just some quick examples of class versus individual. If you look at the sweater with some fibers, and then you've got a broken bottle down below. Which do you think would be class and which would be individual? The fibers would be class because they could have come from all kinds of different sweaters if you're just calling them, finding it as fibers. Whereas the broken bottle, you've got the broken pieces that could fit in like puzzle pieces. And so the big pieces would be considered individual evidence. The little teeny tiny ones might end up being class evidence. This type of evidence, what do you think it is? We'll talk about it. All right, crime scene investigation team. Who is at the crime scene? Well, the police are there, obviously, and possibly a district attorney, depending on the crime. There's going to be CSIs, and if there's a dead body, there will be medical examiners and or the coroner. We'll talk about the difference between those in class. There's going to be the detectives who do all the police work like in Crime 360. And there will be specialists if there's something such as like blood spatter all over. You will get a blood spatter expert to come in and work. Fingerprints all over the place, fingerprint expert. The first officer to arrive at the scene is responsible for securing the crime scene. They are going to look around and they're going to see if there's anybody who needs medical assistance and help them. If the bad guy is still there, they will arrest them. If possible, they're going to keep the witnesses there and separate them. We've already talked about why. And as soon as they can, they're going to remove all the unauthorized people from the scene, and they're going to be putting up that crime scene tape. Then the lead investigator will start the process of evaluating the area. They're going to determine the boundaries of the scene and see if the crime scene tape needs to be moved. They're going to establish the entry and exit of the perpetrator, and they'll do an initial walkthrough of the scene to kind of survey it and figure out what kind of strategy they need in order to document and examine the entire crime scene. Here is an example, or are examples, of several different ways of searching. We'll talk about them a little bit more in class. Here's an example of some people that are in a line searching. You've probably seen that in TV shows. This is Columbine High School. This is after the shootings there, and you can see all the little flags. They are all indicating places where there may be evidence. So they're searching the scene. One way of documenting the scene is to videotape it. You're going to begin with saying what the case number is, date, location, and then you're going to film the surroundings, including all the entrances and exits. Then you're going to find all the evidence that has already been found and labeled, and you're going to get a wide-angle view and a close-up view of all the evidence. If possible, you'll do a victim's viewpoint of what the victim might have seen. There are some big no-nos. You do not narrate the video or discuss contents. You don't just ramble on about what's happening as you walk around. Let the evidence speak for itself. And you never, ever, ever, ever edit that video. Then you are going to do some photography. There's all kinds of different rulers, as you can see in this picture, that will help us get perspective on size. And you are not going to alter the crime scene. So, such as the picture that's on the screen, you would not move that hammer to get a better view. You don't want to mess with anything until photos are taken from all different angles. The only exceptions would be if somebody is injured and needs to be loaded in an ambulance. Obviously, they are going to be loaded in the ambulance no matter how many pictures you need to take. Here's Columbine again. This is a grid search pattern where they are finding all the different pieces of evidence and labeling it. They're sticking to certain quadrants. And it makes the search a little bit easier when you've got a lot to search. There are a couple of different ways that you can sketch out a crime scene. It is good to just grab a piece of paper, they tend to have notebooks, and sketch out the basics of a crime scene. And then when they get back in the lab, they can do a finished sketch. And that sketch will be drawn to scale, and then it can be blown up and be used in court. Here's an example of a rough sketch. The rough sketch has all the basic information on it, but you do not have to be an artist. You can tell they don't have straight lines or anything. Then you can put that into a program such as this one that Sershi sells, and you can get a nice finished sketch that can be blown up. Alright, that's the end of the first part of crime scenes. Make sure you watch part 2.